One of the main questions for the fall gardening season is always about lawn care, lawn rejuvenation, starting a new lawn, weed control, fertilizing, all those kinds of things. And we've come to the place where we can get all of the answers. We're here with Roy Garr at Garrs Rental and Feed out in Mount Juliet. Tell us about all the things we need to know to have a beautiful lawn.
It's very tough in Middle Tennessee with the heavy clay soils. Right. We have quite a few different fescues. We have the turf types, and we have your regular Kentucky 31. Right. As you mentioned earlier in our conversation, Troy, is that the Kentucky 31 is an old pasture type fescue. Right. Does well. Maybe it's a little coarse. Grass. It's a tough grass.
But it's a coarse kind of clumpy grass.
It's a coarse. It's a fescue. It's a clump type grass. Right. So are the turf types, but maybe the turf types are a little finer blade, a little darker green, don't clump quite as badly as the Kentucky 31s. Right. More of a yard grass, yeah. Sure. And it does a good job. And there's different types, you know. Right.
And what are some of the different types of fescue seed that are out there? What are some that you guys like?
I like actually the Southern Supreme. It's a blend of 3 different turf type fescues. I like a blend as opposed to the single seed. I think that this one has your Falcon in it, which is also a brown patch resistant type, which brown patch is a problem in fescue. So it's a brown, it has Falcon in it. It has a Titan in it. I like that one also. And it has one other turf type fescue. So.
Right, and I know Falcon is one that is recommended by the Extension Service. And as you mentioned, it's very resistant to brown patch, which I'm having a horrible problem with this year. So anything that can help you on the front end, if you can plant a disease-resistant variety, then you don't have to do so much control later on.
Right, yeah. And it does well for that. It's probably the best. It is the best, I think, that they've got out there right now for brown patch resistance.
So if people are looking at either starting a new lawn or overseeding and sort of rejuvenating their existing lawn, what are some of the steps they need to take?
Number one is normally a cooler weather for these. These are all cool season grasses, the fescues are. So you want to wait till it cools down a little bit. So that's normally about the 3rd week of September, and also by then we normally get some better rains or some more consistent regular rains. Yes, sir. Mm-hmm. And soil preparation. If you just throw the grass seed out on the soil, it's like throwing the concrete. Right. You know, you really need to work it into the soil somewhat, rake it, scratch it, whatever you can do, aerate. We have overseeders. There again, it makes a dirt seed contact. Right. If I've got any thatch on the top surface, thatch is good. Thatch can help to make that dirt seed combination to hold moisture, get better germination, and that's where it goes.
Right. And I think one of the problems that people have fairly frequently with getting a new lawn established is probably that they don't water enough in the very beginning. Once that seed is down and has come in contact with the soil, grass seed germinates pretty quickly when the soil is warm, and if you don't really keep the water to it for those first few weeks, that first little root comes out, you get some sprouting, and then you get a lot of die-off if it dries out.
Correct, and there again you said water it. You want to water often and not so much heavy. Right. Once it's wet, it's wet. It doesn't do any good to water it an inch at a time or for 2 or 3 hours at a time. Water just for a few minutes, enough to wet the surface, wet the seed, and if you did it 3 or 4 times a day, it's wonderful. Right. At least once a day is what you need. And there again, if you have something to cover it, if you had some of the seed starter mat on top of it, would help a lot, or just straw, rake it. We have the commercial erosion mats, the large mats.
So our philosophy for seed starting is much different than for an established lawn. For seed starting, you're going to water often and shallow. But for an established lawn, you want to water less frequently and deeply so that you get those roots to go down deep and look for water.
Exactly. That's the trick to it too, is to train that root to get it down deep. If I water it lightly every day, and once it's established, you're right, the roots are up here, you miss 1 or 2 days and it's dead. Right. Exactly. So it's important to water properly. Not so much quantity is important, but properly timing is important. So
what about like starter fertilizers or even regular fertilizers later in the fall? What do you recommend for those?
They're good. We like the lawn starters. There again, most lawn starters are lower nitrogen, higher phosphorus, higher potash. Right. Phosphorus promotes good root growth. The potash is a good root builder too. The nitrogen is a leaf grower type thing. So normally you don't need as much for starting seed. We're seeing in the soil samples that come back to us where the customer brings back the results with less phosphorus. Phosphorus stays in the soil, so sometimes they're going down to a lower phosphorus and a higher potash and lawn starter. So,
and then later on in the fall, maybe you already have an established lawn. I've always been of the mind that it's really a good time to fertilize late in the season. What are your thoughts on that?
That's good. There again, let's see, probably the first, second week of October or late September is good. Depending on what the weather's doing. If it's turned off cool and we're getting some rains, mid-September is great, or even 1st of September. I think the old books would tell you to start September 1 with your seeding, but in today's world,
Labor Day weekend has always kind of been the target date in the garden center business and those kinds of things, but it just sort of depends. You know, if it's still 90 degrees outside and we're not getting any rain, then you may want to hold off for a few weeks.
Exactly. So, yeah, and there again, getting back to watering and things of that sort, your aeration is important. I'm not big on aeration, but I think that if you haven't aerated in a year or two, it's good to go and do it.
Right.
And I want to do two things. I want to aerate deep so that when it does rain, I get some penetration of the moisture. And also, if I'm seeding, I want to then just aerate a lot. I want to poke the ground to give my seed a lot of place to tuck into and hide away in. But I do want to get some deep depth aeration for soil or water penetration. So when it rains, it doesn't run all off. You know, I want to absorb some. And while you've aerated, it's a good time to put some soil amenities in. You know, whether it be lime or whether it be
if you've had a soil test done and it's indicating that you need to lime or do any of those kinds of things, it's a great time to kind of get it all done at once. I guess the only thing that you probably can't do is do weed control and seed at the same time, because your weed killer will
affect the seed. You cannot do both. If you reseed, you know, you have to wait till you've mowed it 3 times before you use a de-weeder type thing. Or if you de-weed, you need to wait, whether it's a liquid or granules, anywhere from 3 to 5 weeks. So it's or say 2 to 5 weeks, depending on whether it's liquid or granules. So it's hard to do both in fall time. Most time fall is for reseeding and giving your existing grass a boost. And sort of getting ready for the next year. You know, getting ready for the winter for the next spring too. Also.
Well, thank you so much for letting us come and visit today and giving us all of these tips and tricks for establishing your beautiful lawn at home.
It's a beautiful fall day in East Tennessee. We're outside of Knoxville, and I'm visiting with Joyce Montgomery today. We're going to show you how to prepare your ponds for winter. Joyce, you were telling me that there's really 4 major steps, and I want you to start with each step and kind of run us through that.
Okay, be glad to. Debris in the pond is a major problem. So we need to, first of all, take care of the plants that are around the edge of the pond and the plants that are down in the water.
About what time of the year are you talking about to get rid of this debris?
When they start dying back in the fall.
Okay.
When the weather gets cold, they'll start getting brown. Now, as you can see over there where Laura is, that is a lotus. But once it dies off, the stems close up and you need to trim it back all the way to the bucket. The lotus, before it dies off, has a hollow stem, and you don't want to cut it below water level because some debris can get down in those hollow stems. You don't want any decaying debris left in the water because it upsets the ecosystem.
Okay.
If you leave debris like leaves or dead plants, you will have a tannic effect on the water.
And
it'll look like tea. Okay. So you want to get all the organic matter out so you don't have tea-colored water. Now when you're trimming your lilies, most lilies are on an 18-inch shelf. They're not sitting low in the bottom of the pond like the lotus is. If you don't want to get in the water like Laura is, you can use this and you cut the lily down to actually within 2 to 3 inches of the pot.
Okay.
If the pots are on ledges, you should be able to reach them, so you shouldn't have to get too wet. The floaters are water hyacinths and water lettuce for the most part. They are annuals. They're very fragile when it comes to cold weather. And if they decay, they will sink to the bottom and cause a lot of debris as well. So we need to, when they start getting brown, we need to start pulling them out as well. They're great to put in a compost. Now the hardy marginals, such as that pussy willow, you don't need to go below water level. You can just cut them 2 to 3 inches above water level. They will come back next year. So when you cut the plants back, remove the matter, but also using a net to put over the top of the water will help protect the pond from leaves that are falling. Koi and goldfish are hardy, and they can make it through the winter as long as you have at least 18 inches of water in this area. Now, when the water temperature drops below 55, it's important to not feed the fish.
And why is that?
They're cold water. They go into a semi-hibernation, so they cannot break down the normal foods that we would give them. There is a cold temp food that you can feed them between the temperature, water temperature of 65 and 55. It has less protein, it makes less ash, it's much easier for them to digest. In fact, you don't need to feed koi anytime. They are algae eaters. If you feed them too much, then your algae will bloom.
Really?
Mm-hmm. So you have to be very careful at how much you feed them.
Okay, Joyce, we've talked about getting our plants ready for the winter. We've talked about our filter and debris for the winter. We've talked about fish. What else is there to do for the winter time?
Okay, in this area, in Tennessee, we do not recommend shutting down waterfalls.
Okay.
The fish need oxygen all year long. Oxygen actually is held better in cold water than in warm water, and the fish slow down in their metabolism, but they still need oxygen. The waterfalls provide oxygen. We also have cold water bacteria. Bacteria is helpful in controlling algae. If you have warm days and cold days, the normal bacteria is going to die.
Okay.
So you can use cold water bacteria to help carry you through the autumn and again in the spring to keep the algae down if you have algae blooms.
What about this bicycle helmet with a with a cam on the top?
Okay, if someone chooses not to run a pump during the winter, this can be used instead. Some pumps take a lot of electricity, but this will actually bubble the water.
Is this actually called a pump or does it have another name?
This is a pump,
Okay.
right? And you just plug it into your 110 outlet.
Okay.
Bubbles spurt out of here. You can get oxygen then in the water, and it also helps disperse gases that have collected because of some of the debris you might not have gotten out.
So I noticed that amongst your beautiful pond and your bogs, you also have some streams. If a person was interested in getting started on something like this, give me a rough idea what something like this would cost.
Okay, you can either do it yourself if you're strong or have strong friends, or you can have it done by a crew that has equipment to handle heavy rocks. Normally we price streams and waterfalls at $100 a foot.
Okay.
That includes the labor and materials. And we can do a pond that is, say, 11 by 16 for probably somewhere around $10,000.
Okay, that gives everybody a good idea. I also wanted to ask you, I know we've been talking mostly about winterizing our pond. Briefly tell me how we kick this baby back up in the spring and get her going for us.
Okay, we get anxious then when we start seeing some green. We have usually left the grasses. We did not cut the grasses back in the fall because they provide nice texture. You've lost all the color and now you want the texture, the movement with the wind. When you first start seeing the grasses come back in the spring is when you cut the grass back to about 12 inches. You need to leave enough of a height so that the grasses don't fall off.
Right.
Okay? The other thing we do is add bacteria. Just like we add bacteria in the fall when it is cool, we can add cool temp bacteria in the spring to kick in the ecosystem.
Okay.
The ecosystem is a very fragile system. It depends on all the different factors that Mother Nature provides, so we need to help her get started in the spring.
So the bacteria kind of acts like if you had a swimming pool, kind of like the shock in the fall and in the spring.
Right.
Okay. I've learned a lot today, and I want to tell you thank you very much for sharing, and I think this has been very informative for people. So thanks for having us out today.
Well, thank you so much for coming. Everybody's got dry hillside.